You want to drive faster? Listen in as Kinch Rendell, an SCCA National Trophy winner and multi-time Pro Solo champion himself, interviews the best autocrossers in the land. He talks fast and drives even faster. And now here's your host, Kinch Rendell.
Today's show features Scott McHugh. He was your solo nationals champion in A-Stock in 2002, 2004, and 2009 Chevy Corvette. For Pro Solo, he has 4 championships, 1 in B-Stock 2011 in a Corvette, A-Stock 2005 Chevy Corvette, A-Stock 2002 Chevy Corvette, and then F-Stock 1996 Pontiac Firebird. It was fun chatting with Scott. We might have a part 2 to this because we talked about a lot of stories. Some of the things that stand out to me is how he says he seems to be very smooth when people ride with him or watch him, how smooth he is when it comes to the brake pedal. And to give it away now, he's a right foot braker, and yet he's still really smooth. And I don't know this because I have not seen data. He hasn't really taken data. But it sounds to me like he's very good at trail braking very smoothly because people don't know when he's on and off. That always fascinates me. I'm always surprised how good people are with the right foot. I keep thinking I should challenge myself. Maybe you should as well. I hope you enjoyed the show. Scott, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Kinch.
Thank you for the time. So start off with when you got into autocrossing. When did you start? What were you driving?
Oh, Datsun 510s. First one was in Pleasanton, California, about 1973, a few years ago.
Nah, I mean, I was born right after that. I came into the world.
Thanks, buddy.
Hey, you still look nice and young. You probably started racing when you were 5, I guess. That's about right. Right age there.
Yeah, I was on my bicycle for a lot of years, and I just wish they had mountain bikes back then. I would have been doing that back then like I am now.
So you were how old when you started?
Pardon?
How old were you when you started?
Okay, so I was, looks like I was about 18.
Wow.
17 or 18.
Okay. I am jealous, I have to admit. When there's people like you, I hear about this, or Chris Dorsey, we're talking, and I realize he started at 16. I'm like, wow, you've been racing over half your life already. Some of that at least clicks for a lot of us. We realize, oh, some people have done this a long time. So what got you into it? How did you even find out about autocross? Did somebody else do it?
Yeah, well, a friend had told me about it, about this great sport. I went over and did it and got hooked. Prior to that, I was driving like you shouldn't do in the canyons and stuff, on the windy roads. And obviously, it's best to do all that kind of stuff on the track. And autocross was really a perfect platform. And needless to say, even though, I got into a road race car for a year or two in the late 70s, nothing, being on an open track, on a real track, doesn't provide the adrenaline rush that you get with autocross or the next level Pro Solo, which just adds one more element to it.
I always like to admit, yes, I'm addicted. I think I'm going to call people back and just talk Pro Solo because obviously I like to drive across the country. That is amazing. That's where Lincoln's coming up. Hey, if you want to fly out, let me know. I'll get you a seat, even for nationals. If you don't want to drive H-Stock, right now he's Mr. H-Stock, driving on Kumo still, let me know. So can you think back to that first time? What got you hooked? What were you amazed at? It was a Datsun 510, you said?
Yeah. Yeah, it was an out of class, Datsun 510. I had my Datsun competition suspension on it. The thing was lowered, which put it into a class with race cars where people were, back in that day in the 70s, it was non-SCCA in the beginning that I was involved in, which were a lot of the clubs around the country were that way. And the class I was in, I was competing against guys with, full slotted front end camber suspension with built motors, 8-inch wide wheels with 7-inch wheels back then in the 510s with huge Goodyear racing slicks. And so, but still, it was just being on the clock, the fun, and obviously, you really compete against other people there as best you can with something more relevant to what you're driving. And it was just, and the adrenaline rush that you get when you autocross. And you said the word, you're an addict. It gets very addicting, as we all know, once you get in the driver's seat and you take off and the flag goes down for the first time. I mean, it's a hoot. That's all there is to it.
When you say adrenaline, do you get shaky hands?
I mean, that's part of the beauty of it, because depending on the day, it still happens to me where occasionally you get the clutch foot or the hands will start getting a little nervous or shaky, and again, and after doing it all these years, to still have that kind of rush going through you is, I think, part of the reason why we all love the sport so much.
Yeah, good point. Now, I've never heard, you said clutch foot. What is that?
Oh, well, you're just sitting there waiting at the line, and all of a sudden you get a little rumble in the left leg. I mean, and just a little shake. It's like, I guess I'm getting pumped up for this.
my left leg is ready.
And it still happens after all these years. So what can I say?
Yeah, that's impressive. You're right. That kind of adrenaline where your hands are shaking afterwards is not something normal. Like, what else can you do that happens? I finally played ice hockey again last night, first time in 6 years. I wasn't shaky. I was tired, but there was no shaky adrenaline. There was none of that.
Right.
So you started in 73. How much were you racing back then? How many events did you make it to a year? Did you get hooked right away?
Yeah, I mean, there were lots of other things going on. So, I mean, I probably went to 3-4 events a year, maybe 5 or 6. But, certainly didn't make all the events that were available at the time, just because doing other things, going to school or skiing or doing this and that. And yeah, so no, it was not a regular thing that I would attend all the events back in the beginning.
Did that ramp up at some point later on?
Well, let's see. Eventually when I got down into Southern California, grew up north in Northern California, and about 83 or so moved down for job down into Southern California. And it's probably about 85 or so after being here a couple of years, I sought out the local autocross group, and it was kind of a hybrid combination back then. SCCA was getting together with these local car clubs and putting together an SCCA series, and had an old 510 again, a different one of the I think 7 or 8 that I owned, and actually the last one that I owned, and went out and just had a blast. And classing was a little fairer in terms of the car prep that I had, and it was also back in the beginning of the Yokohama A001Rs, which were creating new excitement in the autocross world just because of how sticky they were compared to the old guard performance street tires.
So this newer tire, getting faster, has been going on forever.
Yeah, pretty much. And I want to say it was 85 or thereabouts, as I recall, that we had the A001Rs on the 510. Yeah. And then that led to the A008 and, et cetera, et cetera.
So when did you start pro solo racing? Because you mentioned, I think, 96. What were you driving, and when did that start for you?
Well, I think the first one I went to was, pretty sure about this, 1989. And I had heard about pro solo, and it sounded fantastic. The reality was I really hadn't thought about doing it with the Datsun, because the Datsun I had, like previous, was still not prepared near to the class rules. I was running D street prepared in a car that was closer to stock than DSP. No camber on the front end, just a rear sway bar. Yeah, just was not as competitive as it could have been by any means. And so I really, wasn't doing well. I shouldn't say that. I was placing maybe second, third, fourth at divisional events that we had back then, which were the SCCA national caliber events. But I didn't have the car. And then, so the first time I actually got into a car that was, quote unquote competitive, was a friend asked me if I wanted to go, and he had a C4 Corvette. And the C4 Corvette was one of the cars to have in whatever that was back then. I think it was super stock back then. And so lo and behold, I go up to Golden Gate Fields to Northern California to a pro, and I end up coming in a couple of tenths off the guy that wins class, and then I ended up going to the final 4 in the handicap challenge at my first pro solo in a car that was, a fair fight with what everybody else had. And then I kind of realized, okay, so I can play with people. My driving caliber has been sort of suppressed because I've been driving a almost stock vehicle in street prepared classes. So the finishes weren't first or second even most of the time. But as soon as I got into a competitive car, and it happened on a few more occasions, where I get into fast people's cars and immediately go a lot faster than the people that were deemed fast in the class.
Yeah.
And so that was the start of my love of the small block V8 in rear wheel drive, because eventually I bought the Firebird about 4 or 5 years later, and kind of shelved my Integra, which I had a couple of Integras early on too, first and third gen Integra, and then when I bought the Firebird Formula, the Jansen's car, I got out of front wheel drive for about, for the most part, for about 20 years. I still had my Civic hatchback and a few things I'd take out once in a while, but basically for the most part, the last 20 years I've been in V8 rear wheel drive.
And you mentioned Integras. You've mentioned to me more than one occasion, hey, you should get the, what was it, GS? You told me about one of those, has a nice amount of torque, no VTEC. You should really try that in G stock.
Well, actually, what I had was an E-Stalker back in. I had the first year in '94, the first year the last gen Integra, and it was a non-VTEC car, 140 horse, 1800, and it was in E-Stock back then, and did the standard stuff, a little toe in the back, a little toe in the front. There was very little camber on those things. You just basically loosen the bolt as much as you could and pray that you got like a 1/16 of an inch of negative. And but at one of the events, it was actually a national tour, I do recall, and it had to have been 94, 95 down in San Diego. Had the thing dialed in, super torquey motors, those non-VTEC 1800s. And it rained. It was a record rainfall one day at the tour for San Diego. They got like 10, 12 inches of rain in 12, 24 hours, whatever it was. And it was unfortunately horrible at the national tour. But what I loved, what I ended up with at the end of that weekend was fastest stock time in the wet, faster than super stock, H stock, whatever stock there was back then. Not fastest in the dry, but over the 2 days for the tour, my E Street E stock Integra, I had the fastest stock time for the weekend of all the classes, which was pretty good.
Yeah, with a car with no limited slip.
Right. Well, in the wet, it was. I've always loved the rain. Done very well in the rain whenever it has rained. Unfortunately, for me, Kench, it hasn't rained enough, in my opinion, over the years at Nationals. I would pray for rain a lot, because I kind of put my rain driving, up with anybody's from what I've seen, and so I love the wet, and people used to ask me at Nationals, especially the Midwesterners, when they had experienced something that happened once in the wet with me, and they said, "How the hell it doesn't rain out in California? How the hell do you drive like that in the rain?" I said, "Well, I did a lot of skiing in my youth, and after skiing with my 4, Continental Contact snow tires and my 510, I would go out and find a backcountry snowy road that had nothing but snow on it. Great practice for car control."
Okay, so what did you give us the tips on that? Okay, you drove a lot. Do you know what you actually do when it comes to rain? I'm wondering, do you use the brakes easier? Do you drive straighter? Or I would bet, from what you just said, maybe you arc more, if possible.
Well, when people have ridden with me, they always say that you're not using the brakes that much, which you can only take that with a grain of salt.
Yes.
But an example is I've ridden with very fast people at a practice event, or where you can have 2 drivers or two people in the car, and I drive somebody's car, they drive my car, and a lot of people drive smooth, and a lot of people drive rough. And I made a comment once with somebody that has won a few titles, and I super hard brake into the corner, and this was in a Corvette, and then hard on the gas, very abrupt, a lot of abrupt moves. And then I did it, and with that person, I went about a second and a half faster on a 60-second course. And one of the first comments was, "You're not braking that hard. You're kind of rolling into the corner." And I've always been easy on tires, easy on equipment. Jeff Reitmeyer once told me, I think it was 2002, he was watching me when I was running the C4. He made a comment afterwards. He said, "Scott, fantastic job winning the title." He said, "You looked slower on course than all the other top cars. Corner to corner, you were just, everything kind of looked really smooth and the same. And other people were, aggressive here, aggressive there, were braking this and that." And he said, it looked like you were going so slow compared to the other guys. And he just said, "Great job."
Because you were not abrupt, basically. So that tells me you're probably smooth onto the brake pedal and off of it.
Yeah, it's all about front drive, rear drive. It's really the same. It's the same process. I mean, you don't want to my theory is you certainly don't want to unsettle a car, and to do it as smoothly as possible seems to have worked very well for me over the years. And when I've driven shotgun with people and vice versa, usually people comment, and again with a grain of salt, they say you're not aggressive on the brakes and abrupt with the wheel. I can't believe how linked up everything is and how smooth everything is.
Yeah, that makes me think of John Ames. He'll just say, oh, it looks so smooth. It doesn't look like he's doing much. Whereas I feel like I'm very aggressive attacking the brake pedal. I'm going to give David Faust some credit for that. He was mentioning when I had the Type R, he goes, you should feel the anti-lock brakes almost every time you go to brake the car. So I took that and said, oh, I'm going to try to do that. Not that I honestly remember feeling the anti-lock brakes take over, but I know I'm pretty hard into things, which is, on this podcast, a lot of people have been pointing out how smoother into these turns on the brakes is actually usually better.
Right, and I mean, I'm not trying to say that you don't want to get deep into a brake pedal on certain places on a given course. Of course, you need to be, but but you're right. There's a different way of applying it and letting up on it, along with steering input. That just some people do it a little smoother or a lot smoother than others, and and certainly the other thing that is most important in my eyes, and I think Randy Popes even wrote it in one of his articles to us, is maximizing entry speed, and of course in doing it smoothly where you're not just completely annihilating the tires. But I think Randy said in an article once in Sports Car, everybody can come out of a corner fast, put your foot on the gas, accelerate out of the corner. But maximizing entry speed is one of the most important things that a lot of people simply don't do. And I've always, especially with newbies or people coming up, or people that if you're at a practice event on a weekend and they're asking for your input and stuff, and I always say, well, one of the things you want to always do is, I always want to feel is some type of minor understeer. Even if the car is loose, my point being, if you want to feel feedback from the front tires, if you're just braking hard going into the corner and you're not feeling the pushback, the feedback from the steering wheel with a little bit of push, if you're not getting that going into a corner, you're not entering the corner fast enough. You're not going as fast as you can. And I use that as a barometer in everything I drive, whether it's the, don't laugh too hard, the Honda Accord, or if it's a Z06. Corvettes are fun, great power, great balance, but going into a corner, I want to start it and feel the minor understeer that you're still obviously in your preferred racing line. We're not talking John Deere stuff here, but if you're not feeling some feedback from the steering wheel where you've got to turn it in just a little bit more, you're not entering the corner fast enough, in my opinion.
So if anything else, I like what you're saying. Really pay attention to that to figure out if you are entering as fast as you could. In that case, at that point, you might turn the steering wheel some more depending on the tire and the slip angle. But then you can use your right foot, the gas pedal, to really set that arc by trail braking some more. I guess you might use your left foot if you're left foot braking. But then you at least entered so much you could scrub off some speed. Is that one thing you're thinking? If you enter a little too hot, you scrub off a little bit, and then you're setting it with your right foot?
Well, and it's kind of a combination of, and that's where people go, God, you're not, Scott, you're not, like, your time's faster than mine, but you're not braking like I am. And I want to describe it, Kench, as maybe as best I can, that I'm not quite as, throw out the anchor on the brake pedal as a lot of people are. And I'll hit the brakes, then I let the front end do its thing early on corner entry.
And you're gauging the feedback there. You're being good at what you're feeling through the wheel to tell yourself,
if you turn in and you're not turning the wheel at all further, then you didn't enter that corner fast enough, in my opinion. And if you've got a little bit, you're going a little bit with a minor push, where you're feeling the minor push, but you're totally in your preferred line. I want to think that and say that what I do is, because I'm not as aggressive in other people's eyes that have ridden with me. Likewise, when I'm riding shotgun, I go, holy shit, I can't believe how hard you're on the brake pedal. And again, there's certain times you got to use the brakes, obviously, but I want to say that what I do is maybe let off of them earlier than some people, and then I let the front end of the car tell me how fast I can go through the corner.
All right, I'm going to try to get deep into this right here. So I would think if I enter the corner too fast and I turn the wheel, if I'm pushing, I'm going to probably need to open the wheel a little bit is what I try to make myself do. I didn't do this last weekend. But open the wheel and let the car slow down a little bit. And you're telling me to turn the wheel more because I want a tighter line because I came in so hot. So one way or another, I need the car to be a little bit tighter on the line, most likely.
Well, and again, I think the bottom line is if you're in again in my world, you enter the corner. If you're not getting just a little, and we're talking minutia, but a little bit of. Okay, you're making a left-hand turn, you turn in, and now you're turning the wheel just a little bit more, and you're feeling the push on the front tires. But we're talking what I call a good minor push. You're working the front end of the car at maximum speed through that arc.
Yep. Which
and
is the key, obviously.
And again,
whoever's at the maximum grip level, maximum speed for that line is going to be fastest.
Well, I missed the beginning of that.
Oh. Well, I like to say that whoever's on the, let's say, tightest line or the best line at the maximum speed, there you go. Well,
yeah, and again, you're making these minutia, changes as you're going through the corner, but it's, I try and keep it as smooth of an arc as possible, but I like to feel some feedback from the steering wheel that's saying, no, you just got to turn in a little bit more.
Yeah.
Again, not John Deere push, ruins everybody's day. Yeah, you've entered the corner too fast. You're not close.
I'm also wondering, I'm a big believer in what you said, Randy talked about, that what I've read in one of the books I read that was mainly track oriented. They said once you get to pro level driving, it's all in the brake zone. He who carries the speed the furthest. And on track, once again, like you'd said, you did a little bit of that for a couple of years. It's the same thing over and over, so you can really refine that. Where in autocross, it seems really dicey, but I've always thought I'm really good at braking late and then trail braking. And what I believe you were saying, or what you're saying you do, I don't know if you have data to back this up, I think you're easy on the brakes and very easy coming off where you're trail braking for a good amount of time.
Well, here's the other element with me. I don't left foot brake.
That's one of the questions. And with we were talking, I wrote it down again. I'm like left or right. So you are not even left foot braking, which I'm always amazed because I left foot brake now. So anybody that doesn't, I'm like, how are you being so smooth? Huh.
I've been asked that for people that ride with me and everybody says usually the same thing, that I can't believe the time you're turning, but I can't believe how smooth you are. And those are I get the smooth thing a lot, and then with a lot of, you don't seem to be braking as deep and abruptly as I do.
Yeah, I think you're being so smooth that you're just easing into it. And if people are listening haven't done this yet, you need to really pay attention to how you come off of the brakes, especially I'd say in these front-wheel drive cars I usually drive. There's a huge difference when you just ease off back into the acceleration. Huge. And I think what Scott's pointing out here, it's also huge how you get into it. Someone had told me once again, it was David Fouth, and someone else pointed out, get on the brakes hard. Now, don't just slam them, but as quickly as you can, get to it if you need that. And then come off easy. If you abruptly jerk off the front-wheel drive cars, you just threw a lot of weight back off of them. So, Scott, at some point here, you went from lots of rear-wheel drive to some front-wheel drive. What have you jumped around cars a lot, or did that just start when you got in some competitive cars?
Well, no, I mean, I love Hondas. I had my CRX SIs, I had my Civic SIs. Two of the Civic SIs are still in the family with my brother up in Santa Cruz. So I've enjoyed Hondas, although the Corvette guys, have for years given me a bad time when I go back and drive one of the Hondas. And, but again, most of the time I've been running rear-wheel drive V8s for the past, since 95 when I bought the Firebird in F stock. And last year, I drove the Civic hatchback a few times, Kench. With my wife and daughter like driving the Civic at autocrosses. So we, like in 2008, I think it was, we went out and did a bunch of events and had fun with it. But I was still driving the Corvette at national events. And I've whenever I have switched, I don't seem to have a problem switching from car to car, front drive, no power, decent power, rear wheel drive with power. The Corvettes they're more fun to drive than a Honda. Yeah. It's more fun to come off the corner with 400 horsepower. Absolutely. But, Hondas in their own right have been a blast to drive as well. I still remember the Integra. The Integra I only had for the last gen Integra I had for about a year and a half before I bought the Firebird. And I was really having a great time and ripping in that car. And I was actually kind of sorry to see it go, but it was onto the Firebird.
So do you have any mental difference in approach when you get in one car versus the other at all?
No.
And I think that a lot of credit goes to the smooth driving style then. Because Leslie Cohen, I was like, what are your differences? What do you think about?
I'm laughing about it, but you when I would get out of the Civic after in 2008, I think I won the California State H stock thing that year because there was a trifecta. There was a San Diego, I think an El Toro event, and one up at Golden Gate Fields in NorCal. And, so I won the state title in an H stock 89 Civic Si, but then I'd go to pro solos and national tours and nationals and run back then it was a C4 Corvette. And, when you get back in a Corvette, you got to tell yourself, okay, you have to remember to be, the difference there, okay, Kench, would be you have to be smoother on the gas pedal.
Yes.
On the V8 cars because of what you're dealing with power-wise. You can't just pull the trigger on an 89 Civic Si, you know the car, especially with a stock motor. You can especially on left-handers, you can give it all it'll take. And, when you get back in a Corvette, you've got to be smooth on the gas pedal. But I seemingly did not have an issue going back and forth with front-wheel drive to rear-drive V8s.
All right, we got to get back to this left versus right drive wheel because you mentioned this before the show, and it's something I've never thought of, maybe I've heard. But what you pointed out is so true. When I got in the Z06 Vet that Lundgren had at one point, all I told myself is do not mash that pedal. Because in the Civic, especially here at this altitude, you can mash the pedal anytime you'd like.
Right.
And then even in the Civics, you get to sea level, and all of a sudden I realized, or the Type R, whoa, I'm so jerky on the gas pedal because it was an on-off switch. So I'd remind anybody, make sure you're being smooth even on the gas pedal. I find when I ride with people a lot lately, they are just all on or all off instead of modulating. So many times I was telling people this last weekend, I want you to give like 20% gas 2 seconds earlier instead of 100% 2 seconds later. And what you're saying, that to the vets, that gets me. When I get in these rural drive cars lately, I know I'm like, you cannot mash that pedal. Yet this last event, I exited every 180 wide because I started putting my right foot in. And all the way it went to the rear wheels. I was like, oh. All right, left drive wheel versus right drive wheel. Hondas, open diffs.
Right.
What's going on here? You said take a left, your right drive wheel's the drive wheel or something?
Well, your right wheel is your drive wheel in a Honda.
I like learning things. See, this is great.
So you go through a left-hander, and I joke that you go through a left-hander when I would have people drive my car, and they'd ask, give me a few pointers before I take it out on course. And I said, well, in a Honda, you go around a left-hand turn, you'll find you can mash the pedal, and it'll take all the power you want to give it. You got a limited slip going through left-handers.
Huh.
Going through right-handers, gee, same radius corner. What's the problem? The right front wheel is the drive wheel, and you're lifting it off the ground. So you're ripping the tread off the right front tire. And so you typically find on a right-hand corner in a Honda, you're at somewhere between half and three-quarters throttle through a corner, and the same corner the other direction, you're probably flat through it, and you're not doing anything to your tires, just ripping through the corner.
I have never thought, but when you say that, that reminds me that I think it was Andy Hollis and someone else, they started putting different spring rates right to left and noticed that helped them. And I'm coming back to that must be because of what you're describing.
Yeah, I mean, well, in an open diff front driver, and although most of my experience has been in Hondas or Acuras, it's just the way it is. You go through a left-hander and take a lot more, take full throttle or a lot more gas than it will through the same corner going the opposite direction going through right. And I've never actually did get to drive a Type R, so I don't I don't know what the limited slip's like on the old Integra Type Rs, but certainly with the open diff cars, it's a whole different story. This Accord is actually. I had commented on it the first time I drove it. My son and I were co-driving it up at Marina on 200 treadwear tires for the first time. And we were going over the fact that, hey, through the right-handers, and I went out first and was the test mule. I was the tire warmer for my boy. And I come back and I go, I have no idea what it is. Maybe it's the immense size of the car compared to an Integra or a Civic. Maybe it's the strut tower brace that Honda put on this, or I'm not sure what, because it has stock shocks. It's got a lot of power out of that 2.4, whatever motor that's called that they've been using for years. 189 horsepower, 2.4. It's torquey. It's a mild VTEC, they call it, but it's also got a ton of low end. And yet on right-hand corners, I was shocked that it seemed to take more throttle than the Civics or the Integras would do through a right-hander. It just seemed to put the power down a little bit better. By no means like a limited slip, but it was just one kind of nice surprise. I have no idea what in the suspension geometry is doing it, but given how stock the thing is, but it's actually been a nice thing to see.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, the fact that you once again brought out a Honda, it's a what year model?
2013, the first year of the, nobody knows what these things are. The Honda Accord Sport model, which is only available still in 2016 in a four-door. Half the people have asked me, wow, it must be the V6 that makes it as fast as it is. Well, V6 Accord would be G Street. And no, it's a 2.4 four-cylinder that runs on 87. But, it's done a whole lot better than I thought it would. Do I suggest it's the car for each street? Absolutely not. The one thing we've been talking to people up in Northern California, they wondered what the car really weighed. So I weighed it at the Pro or the Tour, I forget which. And I was kind of shocked to see it as heavy as it was. One of the guys that runs a Fiesta ST is 2599 on the SCCA scales with his lighter wheels and no spare, no jack, all the crap. And the Ford says it's 27 29, I think it is. So it lost 130 pounds, with significant amount on a 2,600-pound car. Yeah. Well, my car's listed at, actually, given how much legroom there is in the back, a relatively light 3260 or 70 is what the curb weight listed for the Accord is. And it was 3224 on the SCCA scales. So with my 5-pound a wheel lighter wheels and the jack and spare out of the car, I only lost 45 pounds, 50 pounds. But the point being, the Fiesta, apparently in autocross trim, weighs 2,600 pounds. We'll round it. I weigh 3223, which is 624 pounds more than the Fiesta, besides being bigger, wider, longer, doesn't fit through an autocross course as well as a Fiesta would. But the other caveat is the Fiesta has 9 more horsepower.
Wow, does it lack the torque or something?
We picked one pub, to be real. But again, it's impressive for Honda, given the weight penalty and less power. No turbo, 80 runs on 87. In Motor Trend, the Fiesta ST did 6.4, 0 to 60. My big overweight Accord with less power was listed as 6.8.
That is pretty impressive because it doesn't have a ton of, at least, horsepower. But it's a 4-cylinder 2.4.
The 60-foot times from what I've seen with the Fiestas so far, I go to Nationals, which I think I am. I'll find out more back there. But it seems strong with the Fiesta, maybe a couple hundredths, half a tenth better. Supposedly the Fiestas don't have full horsepower until they hit third gear, but they have like most of it. Again, they're. I think one of the Fiesta guys told me they have 181 horsepower in first and second. Some kind of limit on whether it's ignition timing or whatever is doing it. Kind of like the Mazda Speed 3s didn't have full power in first and second gear either. And somebody told me the figure was about 181, and then you put it in third gear, and it's got 198 horsepower. But it's still with 181 horsepower and 2,600 pounds, and I'm at 189 and over 3,200. The power to weight is ugly for the Accord. I mean, it's just
really ugly.
Yeah, it's but it surprisingly, obviously handles pretty good. I must say it was shocking to Max Hader, Tom Berry, both good friends of mine, and Ron. They're all good friends of mine. Jonathan, and I don't know so well, but it was classic, the look on all four of their faces when I came in and shook their hands. And of course, Howard or Kevin or whoever was announcing was, they kept referring to the Accord as the grocery getter.
Yes.
And along with, one of my names, my race team name that I'm using in the national tours and the pros is Stock Shock Racing, because I'm doing that, by the way, Kinch, because Coney and Bilstein or Takiko, nobody makes a off-the-shelf adjustable shock, or Bilstein self-adjusting, whatever, for a late model Accord.
Well, you've got a Sport. You don't need anything more sporty than that.
There you go. I called Coney North America. I said, you can buy Coney's for a 1998 Accord, which is a complete pile. My buddy bought Coney's for his Volvo V70 station wagon, and I can't buy conies for my Accord Sport? They said, nope. No, you can't.
They should give you some. You should be the tester. You go out and win with them, and everybody will want to buy them. It's that simple.
And of course, the problem is whatever they build 300,000-400,000 Accords a year. And you know what, Kench? I may be the lone enthusiast that would even think about autocrossing the car seriously. And again, I'm doing that. A couple people, Gary Thomason asked me, Gary's in San Diego, so it's not like I see him all the time. And he said, after I won, at the Pro at El Toro, he said, "Did you buy that car to compete in H Street?" And I looked at him and I said, "Gary, really? Please." No, I bought this car 3.5 years ago, and it saw its first autocross last year on Michelin's, and I went, what do you know? It looks like it actually might be semi-competitive. Hard to figure, but and again, so I'm doing this because I love the sport. I had sold my Corvette and was co-driving with Tom McDaniel this year in the Z06, but that changed in a heartbeat last fall when Tom passed away, and although I had first shot at buying the Z06, I just decided, one of those conversations you have with your better half at the house, that I just made this big deal about getting a dedicated race car out of the garage. So I wasn't feeling good about just saying, just kidding, even under the circumstances, and bringing the Z06 back into the garage to take another space. So I'm just kind of doing what I can with what I have, and then who knew that I'm 2 for 2 in class of pro solos with a strong finish in my only challenge, and it's making me think I want to go to nationals this year.
And what kind of gas mileage will you get when you drive that to nationals?
If I put the Michelin's on, the other good news on the Honda is my wife and I did a trip out to Albuquerque, out to Farmington a few years ago to meet Tom out there with the Z06. And I got the same as I did going to Big Bear and back, going up to altitude and then coming back down into LA. And got just over 36 miles per gallon on a trip, just the trip period. I got 36 miles per gallon.
Nice. So tell me about co-driving. You drove with Tom. What do you take from co-driving? Good, bad? What's great about it? Why'd you do it so much?
Well, I got into it. I had not really been co-driving with the Datsuns, with the Integras, with the Firebird, and with my first Corvette, the one I won in 2002, the ex-Rita Wilsey car. Her and Gary drove for a number of years. And in 2002, I won the pro title and the national title. And then my son was getting into mountain bike racing in high school, and I said, I'm done with autocrossing. Foolish statement. So I didn't autocross at all in 2003. I got into mountain bike racing myself in the old guys class, and would go to all the races in the state with my kid and support him. And my race was at a different time than his was. And then when I got back into it, Brian Roberts, I bought another car. And meantime, Brian Robertson introduced me to Tom, and said Tom would love to co-drive with you and learn what he can. And so for 10 years, I co-drove with Tom in both the C4 and the Z06. And the beauty of that is I sold my other Corvette that I had purchased after coming back from my 1 year retirement. It didn't last long. I supplied tires, and I was, Kumho contract guy for a long time. And Tom would bring the car to the event. And so, yeah, we would do that. Even not at national races, Tom being in Southern Oregon in retirement and me being in Southern California, we would meet at a lot of San Francisco Bay Area events. He would for like, an AAS weekend or an SCCA weekend, the local group, and or even PCA stuff, we would meet in the Bay Area and do an autocross weekend, and he'd split, go back to Oregon, I'd come back to LA.
Nice.
So it was certainly convenient. It was great. All the camaraderie and the friendship that developed over the years with Tom. Great guy, miss him a lot. And my wife loved it because I didn't have a dedicated race car in the garage. My dedicated race car in the garage was an '89 Honda Civic. I don't need to tell you, it doesn't take much space.
I like them. Any really standout memories from any of those trips, any of the co-driving with Tom?
Oh, I mean, we just had a blast, and whether it was meeting him in Farmington or Utah. God, I missed the Wendover events. Just talking to Cal Craner about that. Missed the drive out to Wendover through the middle of nowhere in Nevada, and just the beauty of the drive out there. But it was all the crazy stuff and laughs we had over the years. I brought Tom's driving up a lot. I didn't get him as far as I wanted him to. It was a great friendship. And there were just so many crazy things. The biggest joke was all the crappy motels, I think, that we all stay in, or many of us do. Some people don't. And we used to laugh. My wife and I would laugh that you be sure and keep staying at these $25 to $45 hotels, Motel 6 or worse than Motel 6. These are also places I'm reminding you that I will never stay.
Yes.
This is guys' weekend only stuff.
Save the money for our trips together.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there were so many. It was 10 years of doing a lot of. We did some road trips together, and then it was nationals. I would fly in, but obviously there were just a lot of memories and a lot of good stuff. I know one of the things Tom loved was the one time we showed up at an Atwater national tour, and he got a kick out of sometimes of special events and the looks on people's faces. And he would talk a lot about, he would bring up the time that it was raining hard one day, full wipers, pooled, and we were running in the C4, whatever we were, A stock, I guess, and the Z06s and GT3s were in super stock. So we were running together. The announcer was talking about, okay, Scott and Kevin Dietz, who ended up winning Superstock, that's where the battle is. And we were running for rain rights again. And so Kevin and Chris Cox came in first and second in Superstock, and they had Hoosier Reigns. And on our A stock C4 Corvette, we had Kumho street tires. Trying to remember the SPTs, just a cheap summer high performance tire, 300 or 400 tread wear, maybe 300. Happened to be really good in the rain. So on the last lap, I have the third run coming. I look at Tom and I said, I'm kind of pussyfooting it. I'm way out front in class, but I'm pussyfooting it. And I said, there's a lot left in the tires. I can't believe it in this weather. I said, I'm going to either have just a wild time on this next run that I think the time's there, or I'm going to spin trying. So I came in, didn't get the spin, went at like a second and a half faster than the prior run, and ended up getting beat by a little over a second. And everybody from Superstock comes over and says, what the hell tires are those? And I look down and I go, Tom and I go, they're just these SPT street tires from Kumo. And they all look at each other and go, street tires? I said, yeah. They told me they work pretty good in the wet, and apparently they do. This is the first time I've driven on it. And Tom always talked about the gaping mouths that the Superstock guys had at that event. He would always just talk about that event, and he couldn't believe how fast the car went in that weather on those tires.
Be like, this is Kumo's super secret rain tire for street cars.
And yeah, I think the only person that actually, other than me, that did an incredible job in the rain, where somebody used them, was we look back, and actually Kevin McCormick, and I think he was running ST at that time. Everybody was running something else, and there was a wet event. I think it was in LA, and Kevin's, you know ST normal and STS. Normally the times are super, super close. Kevin smoked everybody. Kevin's a great driver too.
Oh yeah.
But he was the only guy on Kumo SPTs.
That reminds me of the...
Everybody else had the right tire. Kevin was on these SPT Kumo street tires. He annihilated I think Motonishi was in the field. He annihilated everybody.
Sometimes the Toyo R1R, when I was in D Street running the Hoosiers, I used to drive around on those on the street, and then it rained, and we were top 3 here locally of the top 5 or 6 people, or at least top 10. I was second only because I messed up. It's like, why even have Hoosier wets back then? I was like, and these tires last for a year or two without actually going away. So it's amazing how there can be those little bitty gotchas out there.
Yeah.
So did you and Tom...
So I didn't mean to get too far off track.
No, the stories are great. I want to know, did you guys ever collect any data? How did you help him?
No, no. Shame on us. No data. Zero data. What I would do is we would go into the PCA events, going to the American Autocross Series weekends, and to practice events where you're allowed or have the option of having somebody in the car. And I would do a number. We spent many days or weeks over those years, probably a good couple of weeks, of me helping him come along. And the bummer is unfortunately, Kinch, in my eyes, some of the stuff would wear off when we hadn't rode shotgun with each other. And the last couple of years didn't happen much. And, Tom, with time away from me and kind of instructing and reminding him what to do, he would fall back on some of his old habits.
So how about any video? Did y'all watch video at all?
Don't laugh too hard. No GoPro.
All right, so you can ride with people enough just to learn how to go faster. And that's where also you two being dedicated and being together for 10 years probably really helped you figure out what each one was doing, riding with each other, even every once in a while.
Yeah, I mean, I really, even hate saying this, but it's sort of true. It's just the way it's happened. I mean, I've joked that there have been, joked, but not really. There was a time, and I forget what year, might have been 04. Isley was ahead of me day one, Jason Isley.
Yeah.
So just, I was down on myself. I felt like I just underdrove on day one. We're sitting somewhere and we hear Jason talking in a different crowd. And Jason's talking about, he is selling his car after nationals and there's still a day left. And he said, he says, God, I can't believe how much more money my car's going to be worth being the national champion car. And so I sat there and went, okay, it's not like I needed a match, but I said, I need to drive smarter and harder and just turn the wick up tomorrow. I did so. I kind of annihilated people the second day, and we didn't make any changes to the car. I drove a little harder. It happened a few other times. I remember once at Packwood at a pro, and I had a gnat hair of a lead. There were 2 or 3 people behind me that, in our opinion, probably just shouldn't have been there based on results the prior years and the events after. Shouldn't have been there. What's the problem? And so Tom and I talked about it, and he says, your start's good. He goes, you're kind of just, you're not going out so hard, and by the 180, everybody is really catching back up to you. And I looked at Tom and I said, you know what we got to do? I've got to drive a little harder. That's the change we made.
Yeah. So tell me about car setup. Do you go in there and tweak the shocks much? Are you that guy?
On the C4, we really didn't need to. Once we got that car dialed in, that car needed, there might have been, one site, one event here or there over the years, a lot of years. We would change, one quick rebound, front or back, usually the front. And very, very little changes, many times no changes. My experience in Tom's car, in the Z06, was different. I would drive Rita Wilsey's Z06 or Brian Robertson's Z06 out in LA at practice events and go, let's say with or not far behind or very close to Gary and his Viper, and which is more car, and Gary's Gary. And Tom's car, there was one thing after another with loose suspension bolts. Even when the thing was dialed in, and the bolts weren't moving around on you and changing toe dramatically at an event where you'd have to park the car and between heats or whatever, and tighten the stuff back up. That car, for the most part, never always had some handling glitch that we couldn't put our finger on. And I say that because Brian and Rita's car, identical model cars, we all had the Kumo 710, so it's not like it was all the 710's fault. I'd hop in Rita's car in an event, or Brian's car at a practice, and go 3/4 of a second or a second faster than in Tom's car.
Wow.
that, Tom even had the car dynoed. It definitely wasn't a power issue. The car hadn't been hit, and other people that drove the car felt the bite. And where a lot of my peers would look at my really horrid finishes at nationals in the Z06, and they'd go, Scott lost it. It's like I just sit there with my head down, going, God, what is the problem? And it would do things like snap oversteer that Rita or Brian's car wouldn't do. One time at a AES event up in NorCal, Craig Nagler had his Z06. Sure enough, he hopped in Tom's car. I rode shotgun with him, and 2 or 3 spots, bit him big time, almost spun the car. And he goes, "No," he said, "you can try my car. My car doesn't do that." And so that car we were changing constantly. And to be quite frank, we never really, enjoyed it much, which was a bummer. There were a couple of events it did well. I think it was 2 years ago. Gary in a Viper on Hoosiers, in a very fast Crow's Landing Pro, 600 horsepower versus 405. And when we would launch, even when I would get Gary, and I got Gary on a couple of lights pretty well, it was a bummer to see him drive right by you, accelerating as you're hitting second gear at a Pro Solo, and you're looking at taillights. And but at that event, that weekend, in a lesser car and a lesser tire, I got him by, like whatever it was, 10, 15 thousandths on both sides. That was a good win. But most of the time it was a challenge. It was a challenge in that car. It just didn't do what other Z06s would do.
That's so weird. Like something with the frame or a weld wasn't there, or something was.
Well, but I'll tell you, it was really goofy at the end. And again, I'm comparing it to these other 2 cars that had 710s on them as well. At the very end, we were a year ago. Was it a year ago? Where am I here? Yes, a year ago. Started the season, and Tom had made the switch to street tires. Knew somebody at Falcon, got a set of Falcons, which was, allegedly certainly not the tire. Going into last season, it was the RS3 B2, and then the Bridgestone came soon after. And we didn't change the car at all. We mounted the Falcons. The last few times I had driven the car on 710s, the car was horrible. We didn't change it because the rear tire was a 30 series, not a 35, so there was almost a 1-inch drop just in ride height with these Falcons going on the car. So we wanted to see what the car was going to do. So we drive the Corvette, for the first time on street tires at the San Diego Tour practice. And I was shocked. I drove it first. Tom was shocked as well. His car on the Falcons was easy to drive fast, not tricky like on the 710s. I don't know what that says, Kench. I have no idea. I went on, on Saturday I had a tough day with conage on the first 2 runs, so I had to drive a conservative 3rd run to get a time. But on Sunday, Glenn Hernandez, who had finished 2nd or 3rd at Nationals the year before, had his season in the car on street tires and was on his hand-cooked RS3 V2s. I got Glenn by like 0.8 on Sunday, and Gary in Rita's Z06 also on Falcons on his home course by just over a second.
Wow. That makes me wonder, just guessing things, was that car stiffer? So the softer street tires actually made it more stable or More nimble or easier to drive.
I'll tell you, we tried. Well, let me tell you, in the car as it sits now, it's back with Penske's, done by Nagler. The car had Guy Ankeny Penske's. It had Sam Strano Coney's.
So you tried whatever you could try.
04 OEM Z06 shocks, which Rita and some people have run with success as strange, unadjustable shocks. Only the 04, you wouldn't want to run an OEM Z06 shock from an 03 or an 02. But so we had then Nagler's Penske's at the end. 4 different shock setups in the 4 years in the car.
So you guys really tried to figure it out.
And the best the car ever was, Crow's Landing against Gary was, I called the course so fast in a way that the handling didn't, third gear in a Z06, the corners aren't real tight, whatever. It just seemed to work on a very sticky Crow's Landing surface and didn't do its evil things. But all of a sudden, when we put Falcons, of all things, on the car, full tread Falcons, the car was easy to drive and it was fast. And I have no idea why.
This has been great.
Thanks again for doing this, and again, we can hook it up again if you'd like.
Thanks for listening. For the show notes and contact information, please visit autocrosstalk.com. There you can also subscribe so that we can keep you up to date on new shows as they come out. Also, please leave us a review on iTunes and subscribe on iTunes for the upcoming shows. You can connect to our Facebook page at facebook.com/autocrosstalk. You can share your thoughts, your insights, your questions, your suggestions there. Also share with your friends. Hopefully you found it entertaining and motivating, and hopefully other people will as well. It's been fun, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening, and check back next week for the next show.